The debt ceiling is a limit on the total amount of money that the United States can borrow to fund the government and meet its financial obligations. It was first put in place by Congress during World War I, and it has been raised 78 times since 1960. The current debt ceiling is set at $31.4 trillion, and it was reached on Jan. 19, 2023. But what does the debt ceiling have to do with your bike? Well, if Congress fails to raise or suspend the debt ceiling by June 1, 2023, the Treasury Department will run out of cash and won't be able to pay all of its bills on time. This could trigger a default on the national debt, which means that the U.S. would not be able to honor its obligations to its creditors, such as China, Japan, and other countries that own U.S. Treasury bonds. A default would have serious consequences for the U.S. economy and the global financial system. It could cause interest rates to spike, stock markets to crash, and credit ratings to plummet. It could also reduce consumer confidence and spending, which would hurt businesses and jobs. And it could affect your bike in several ways. For example, if you want to buy a new bike or repair your old one, you might have to pay more because of higher interest rates and inflation. If you want to sell your bike or trade it in for a different one, you might get less money because of lower demand and depreciation. If you want to use your bike for commuting or traveling, you might face more traffic and congestion because of reduced public transportation and infrastructure funding. And if you want to enjoy your bike for recreation or exercise, you might have less access to parks and trails because of budget cuts and closures. So you see, the debt ceiling is not just a number. It is a reflection of the fiscal health and credibility of the U.S. government. And it affects not only the federal budget and borrowing, but also your bike and your life. The debt ceiling is the legal limit on how much the federal government can borrow to pay its existing obligations, such as Social Security benefits, military salaries, and interest on the national debt. Congress has to periodically raise or suspend the debt ceiling to avoid defaulting on these obligations, which would have severe consequences for the economy and the financial markets. How does the debt ceiling impact the economy and the financial markets? Well, first of all, even approaching the debt ceiling can cause uncertainty and anxiety among investors, businesses, and consumers. This can lead to higher borrowing costs, lower stock prices, and reduced confidence in the U.S. government's ability to manage its finances. For example, in 2011, when Congress came close to breaching the debt ceiling, the U.S. credit rating was downgraded for the first time in history, and the stock market lost about 17% of its value in a few weeks. Secondly, if Congress fails to raise or suspend the debt ceiling before the government runs out of money, which could happen as soon as June 2023 according to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, then the government would have to stop paying some of its bills. This would mean that millions of Americans would not receive their Social Security checks, veterans' benefits, tax refunds, or other payments they rely on. It would also mean that the government would not be able to pay its contractors, suppliers, and employees, which would hurt many businesses and workers across the country. Thirdly, if the government defaults on its debt obligations, which means it cannot pay back its creditors who lent it money by buying treasury bonds and other securities, then it would trigger a financial crisis that could spread around the world. The U.S. dollar would lose its status as the global reserve currency, which means that other countries would demand higher interest rates to lend to the U.S. or stop lending altogether. The value of treasury bonds would plummet, which means that investors who hold them would lose money and face higher risks. The interest rates on mortgages, credit cards, student loans, and other forms of borrowing would skyrocket, which means that consumers and businesses would have less money to spend and invest. The stock market would crash, wiping out trillions of dollars of wealth and retirement savings. The economy would plunge into a deep recession, with millions of jobs lost and incomes reduced. In short, the debt ceiling is not a tool to control spending or reduce the deficit. It is a legal obligation that Congress has to fulfill to avoid a self-inflicted economic disaster. Raising or suspending the debt ceiling does not authorize new spending, it simply allows the government to pay for what it has already agreed to spend. Failing to do so would undermine the full faith and credit of the United States and jeopardize its economic security and global leadership. How does the debt ceiling affect your bike's cost, maintenance and performance? The debt ceiling is a limit on how much the U.S. government can borrow to pay for its expenses, such as Social Security, Medicare, and military salaries. The current limit is $31.4 trillion, and the government has already reached it. This means that the Treasury Department has to use some accounting tricks to avoid defaulting on its obligations, but these tricks will only last for a few months. If Congress does not raise the debt ceiling by early June, the government will run out of money and face a default. A default would have serious consequences for the economy and for your bike. Here are some of the possible effects: a weaker US dollar. If investors lose confidence in the US government's ability to repay its debts, they may demand higher interest rates or sell their US bonds. This would cause the value of the US dollar to fall relative to other currencies. A weaker dollar means that imported goods, such as bike parts, accessories, and fuel, would become more expensive. It also means that your bike's resale value would decline in foreign markets. A stock market crash. A default could trigger a panic in the financial markets, leading to a sharp drop in stock prices. This would reduce your wealth and income, making it harder for you to afford your bike's upkeep and repairs. It could also affect your retirement savings and your ability to borrow money for other purposes. A recession and job losses. A default could cause a severe contraction in economic activity, as consumers and businesses cut back on spending and investment. This would reduce the demand for goods and services, including bikes and bike-related products. It would also lead to higher unemployment, lower wages, and reduced tax revenues. This would make it more difficult for you to maintain your bike's performance and quality. As you can see, the debt ceiling is not just a political issue. It is a matter of national security and economic stability. It affects everyone, including you and your bike. That's why it is important for Congress to act responsibly and raise the debt ceiling before it is too late.